Well, hello, everyone. My name is Pat McQueenie. I'm the president of the Eden Prairie Chamber of Commerce, and it's my pleasure today to have the chance to have a conversation with Dario Anselmo. Dario is a candidate for Hennepin County Commissioner, and our goal today is to have a conversation with him, understand what he brings to the table as a candidate for that position and how he may be able to not only serve our business community, but the community as a whole in Eden Prairie and our surrounding area. So welcome, Dario.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Great. To kind of kick things off, maybe could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running for Hennepin County Commissioner?
Sure. I'm Dario Anselmo. I live currently in Edina. I say in my social media, I'm a proud person from northern Minnesota originally, where I was born. My dad was from Hibbing. My mom was from Duluth. My dad was a judge up on the range and worked in the Attorney General's office. My parents divorced when I was quite young, and I moved down to the Twin Cities and lived by Minneapolis, really grew up out in Orono. I later went on and lived in Minneapolis myself and started a computer tech company in Edina and sort of spent a lot of time in the business sector, and then a lot of time because of my father having a persistent mental illness that he was able to successfully deal with in sort of social service areas like mental health, and later to do civic things both in Minneapolis, where I ended up starting a business association. The Warehouse District Business Association was sort of an outgrowth of the Timberwolves, believe it or not, way back when, looking to leave the Twin Cities. And because I owned a business called the Fine Line Music Cafe down there that I ran for 20 years, I got pulled into that role to be the first president and co-founder, along with some people like Richard D'Amico and John Romarsic of Monte Carlo, a lot of the restaurants and places you go. That's a lot of my world. And I'm also involved in commercial real estate still after selling the Fine Line Music Cafe. And I later was a part of the Downtown Council Board for 10 years. And I'm now in the Minneapolis Regional Chamber, which is where the Warehouse District got moved to. And I still plug into my Minneapolis community, very much a part of my Edina suburban community. And I really sort of see myself as sort of a greater Twin Cities type representative when I was a state representative a few years back. And that sort of came out of an outgrowth of all of those things I did before that in the private sector, in the civic, nonprofit, and community service sector. And I'm now looking to run finally for a nonpartisan, at least role or office as a nonpartisan, which is also nice to do for the first time. So happy to be here and look forward to talking more about these issues and what sort of maybe has inspired me to run, besides being an advocate all the time for small and medium-sized businesses, which is what I've done in my private life as well as my public life, and I'm hoping to do in this new shift to Hennepin County.
Great. Well, that ties directly to some of the questions I want to ask you about, especially from a business perspective. The chamber being a nonprofit business association as well, you have some great background there. What opportunities do you see as a way to partner with the chamber as well as businesses in the role of county commissioner?
A lot. Having started a business association, I have a special appreciation. I served as the president of it for 10 years and had to come back after one of the presidents needed to leave, and so I really do appreciate that. And having participated in both local and regional associations, and then actually having to seek the endorsements of groups like the Minnesota Chamber, as well as the Twin West Chamber, which I'm happy to say actually endorsed me again this go round. So I appreciate all the things that they go there. I think having that advocacy voice is so important. I have to say, especially when we're dealing with Minneapolis issues, which you can imagine the challenges of businesses dealing with the Minneapolis City Council. I've seen those battles, so that makes normal politics seem pretty pale in comparison. But you need that advocacy, and a lot of these groups that are there looking for space and airtime at the Capitol or the county or the city just don't have the time to do it. So groups like yours make a difference. And partnering, I think that's the thing I've encouraged a lot of groups to do. Is a little bit of why, even though I was not on the board anymore as an advisor to the Warehouse District Business Association, they needed a larger voice, and that's why they became part of the chamber. But they still get to keep that uniqueness, and that's what's great about the Eden Prairie Chamber. And it functions different than the Edina Chamber, which is a little more of a destination sort of medical message. But I think finding those ways for the political people to know these things. There are not many people like me that are in public office, maybe for a reason. They go on to other things. And other people need to hear those voices. I get it, and I'll be that advocate. But I think those partnerships are key, and letting them know, the cost of doing business in your region, in your city, in your community is not inexpensive. And most of your members are happy maybe to pay that price to a limit, and they just need to be reminded of that. Jobs are what drives this economy. Jobs and the taxes that are paid and the businesses that are generating those, that's what keeps our society going. And we need to make sure that cycle works. When people talk about sustainability in the environment, which I'm happy to talk about as a clean energy advocate, I talk about sustainability in our economy. And we need to make sure that people politically get that. And unfortunately, in these very partisan times, it doesn't happen that way. And I was a very bipartisan political person. I was a moderate independent, as I remind my colleagues. I was a very painfully independent person. And I think that's what you need to have, because that's the business, that's the American spirit. But your organizations, using your voices, being there, being present, bringing your members in, I think there's a lot of opportunities, but there's critical issues: transportation, public safety, property taxes. Those are, 3 of my 4 big issues, besides mental health, which is a passion and something that Hennepin County deals with and does affect the business community, does affect all aspects of our world, which is why I'm happy to champion it, as opposed to the traditional, it's about taxes and it's about, transportation, or it's about public safety.
Great, great. And you probably have experience with this, talking about being at the state legislature, but my next questions are on that budgeting component, that the county's looking at probably a budget shortfall. Some may show it as high as $40 million. Do you have some thoughts and ideas of priorities with programs and any specific cuts that you think would be items that you would at least look at or consider?
Well, good question. It really makes me happy not to be a state representative right now, having to face those budget concerns. And really, I found out as a state representative, you get to weigh in on your committees. When I served on the education committee, which was the biggest spender, and I say arguably one of the most important things our state does, that was a $12 billion budget we dealt with 12 people. So it was a little overwhelming and awestruck. It was a big passion of mine, and still is. But out of a $24 billion budget, it was huge. Now you're looking at Hennepin County, $2.5 billion, the largest unit of government in the state of Minnesota that no one knows about. It's the second largest budget in the state. I think a top line thing for some people that maybe know, Hennepin County, the largest county in the state of Minnesota, largest county in the 10-state region. If it was a state, its budget would be comparable to the 45th largest state budget in the country. That's how big Hennepin County's budget is and processes. A lot of that is preordained money, though. So that's a little bit of the challenge. We work with state and federal partners to do the mandated things that they need done. And so, your hands are tied a little bit when it comes to that. So making those budget cuts are not easy. And the way that they did it this time is there was a 60% reduction to capital budgeted items. The things that District 6 that I'm looking to represent, which Eden Prairie is almost in the middle of, it's 16 cities: Edina, Hopkins, Eden Prairie, and all of the Lake Minnetonka cities, Wayzata, Orono, Shorewood. We care about capital budget items. We use those are more important than per se some of the human services things that are a little more directed at Minneapolis and some of the inner ring suburbs. And we do use those services. So, it's a tougher pill for us to swallow. It's one of those things, if you have to cut stuff, it's easier to cut capital spending than it is maybe mental health services, which I'm a strong advocate for. So that's one of those things that I would not see cutting. Assistance to homelessness. I mean, that's just something that we can't cut. We need to find more innovative ways, and I talked about that on a housing forum last night, to deal with these kind of current crises that are up here right now. And it's just a current crisis. 35 years of being in business and nonprofit and civic work and working with business associations and running them, I know there's just another crisis around the corner. It's just being prepared and being ready for it. So food insecurity, another issue I championed at the Capitol with Second Harvest Heartland, and partnered with businesses and friends from General Mills and other entities to pass a bonding bill to pay for that infrastructure. And thank God we have that in place, because there's a lot of food insecurity. I go and volunteer at a group called VEEP. I know in Eden Prairie you've got PROP, there's ICA. There's 4 social service outlets that Hennepin County partners with. I didn't probably know this before I was involved in Hennepin County government. I just worked with some of these entities at the state capitol. So it's really important that we maintain the social safety net that Hennepin County is supposed to be. Ideally, we'd be delivering on more of these infrastructure things, but we can't do it. Budgets are about making hard decisions. Public safety is not a place I would also see cutting. The biggest part of public safety in Hennepin County is not the sheriff's department, of which again, the deputies have endorsed me, which is wonderful, as well as the first responders. That's all the paramedics that come to the western suburbs and sometimes to some of your businesses and certainly to people's homes and senior places. It's important that we maintain those things in place there, but we pay for a lot of the criminal justice system. And so we can't cut those things back. So those are some of the basic things that I would make sure that we keep in place. And, capital budgets are something important. The good news is Southwest Light Rail is funded. So, that comes out of your taxes and getting those last federal dollars. And I have to say, we'll talk about that later, but it's exciting to see that because I was early on watching it happen when we were in Minneapolis for the first spur of it. So there are public works projects at least going on, but some of the ones that people may have wanted will not be happening, at least this budget cycle.
Yeah, thank you for that. One of the big things right now, COVID-19 and the impact on business, how do you see the county position as county commissioner and what the county does? How do you see opportunities to support business through COVID-19 and helping them make it to the other side and be successful?
Well, there was a lot of dollars that certainly came to our state from the federal government and certainly the CARES dollars that came to Hennepin County, and they're using those dollars to help shore up some of the shortfalls that happen certainly on the healthcare side. They're using some of those dollars to make capital investments and purchasing sort of underutilized assets like some of the hotels, which are not hotels that most people would want to stay at, and making those asset purchases. Of course, in doing that, they're going to have to operate those things, and those are going to be expenses that Hennepin County is going to have to deal with down the road. So, I'll say I'm curious about some of those decisions, and I don't want to make too many outside observations, even though I've been talking to a lot of insiders to say how can we best use those dollars that we're making investments now for the crisis at hand and trying to deal with things like homelessness and transitions. I'm more excited about looking at opportunities and partnerships with other nonprofits, looking at what other states have done to find cheaper ways to deal with the homeless crisis so we don't have encampments and tents. The actual business relief, and I have to say it was frustrating in Minneapolis when we were looking to get business relief for a lot of the small businesses that our business association represented. It was hard to get those dollars. When Minneapolis was allocating it, you had to be of a certain type of business. And it was just very frustrating. You couldn't be a downtown business at times and get, the $10,000 grants. And I'm like, these downtown businesses are struggling and suffering. These are small business, first generation Americans that are running them and all sorts of people. So, the rules that are in place were very questionable. And I guess I asked those questions. This region, saw very little. It saw less than $1 million really in CARES relief. That's not the PPP relief. I'm talking about money that actually came to Hennepin County and then went into this region. So we pay a lot. We don't get as much. I would argue we need a louder voice. We need to find more ways to make sure that that's heard. And that's what I will do. I spent, 20 years fighting Minneapolis City Hall. It seems like a lot of times working with them to do things and working with our capital partners. But, if you don't speak up, you're not going to get something. So we need to find more ways. And I think now it's encouraging people to look at the tax structures that are out there. Look at the regulatory structures. Look at the fees. If you're a restaurant, you're still paying the same licensing fee, even though you're open half the time. We're trying to fight that back in Minneapolis, but it's the same licensing fees that businesses in Eden Prairie pay for. So, having a vital hospitality community is really important for all of the wonderful businesses that are in your particular, zone and district, and the tech companies and things like that. You need places to go eat. You need places to socialize and plug in after this crisis, wanes down. So, we need to look at all of it and be a little fair about that. I could talk a little bit about some of my national advocacy with Andrew Zimmerman on that subject, to try to help the restaurants. And it's an important part of our economy here too. It's actually 1/4 of the state's sales tax revenue is from the hospitality businesses. So it's important, and I'm sure your city is going to see a portion of that besides all the other cities in this district.
Yeah, and to your point, Eden Prairie has a lot of hospitality businesses here, and we want to see them be successful moving forward. You mentioned Southwest LRT, our chamber, along with the other chambers along the corridor, supportive of the project. We've heard from businesses it's a great opportunity to help recruit and retain great employees and keep them here at our place of business in Eden Prairie. Can you tell a little bit about your support or lack of support, however you want to phrase it, in terms of light rail and why you may be supportive or not as supportive with the project? And as you know, Eden Prairie goes, we know there's people that are for it and against it. So.
I was, for better or for worse, and I literally have lost endorsements and maybe gained a few over that. I was a supporter of the early light rail, and Shirley was there, and at the Capitol as a downtown council member to talk about it. I remember going and meeting with a very unique governor named Jesse Ventura in his offices back there. You can imagine what that was sort of like, as it's maybe being replayed in different ways. And he was interesting because he was supportive of it. You wouldn't guess a guy like Jesse would, and where he lived and where he came from would be there. We talked about it, and the way it was sort of sold as multimodal. Now, I don't hear that quite as often. And I have to say, in Minneapolis, when you say multimodal, they forget about the car for some reason. They're all about the bike lanes. And I said, we need to be for all of them. That's the way you sold it. That's the way businesses sort of look at it. There's just different forms of connectivity. Now we have scooters that are part of that equation. So, so I was an advocate. I actually went and did something about it. I can say as a moderate Republican state representative, that didn't make me the most popular person in my caucus. I think I was the only one that was supporting it. And certainly in the Hennepin County delegation, I think it went down to the closer you were to light rail, the more supportive of it you were or felt you had to be. And I remember talking to a friend and a supporter of mine, Doug Baker, who runs Ecolab over in St. Paul. We're fortunate to have a lot of business leaders in Edina, like you do in Eden Prairie and Minnetonka and this area out here. And I said, Doug, I'm just having a hard time quantifying this for people. When you're going to spend $1 billion and you're going to get the federal matching money. Of course, when we talked about Southwest Light Rail way back when, it was a smaller number. How do you quantify that? Because the dollars and cents don't exactly add up. And I get that there's connectivity. I get that there's workforce. He said, you know what? I'll have a hard time really doing that for you. So this is Doug Baker. He says, I can just tell you, that the cost of not doing it for our regions can be way more expensive than what you're going to spend to do it right now. And I thought, okay, that made sense to Doug Baker. It made sense to me. We need to make these investments. They're regional investments, and they are about workforce development, and they are about housing, and they are about the next generation, the millennials and the Zs, and not wanting to be tied to cars. They're still going to need to be in these things and going to soccer practices and probably still driving to downtown like I do in a car and occasionally do on a bike. And we'll probably do it on the Southwest Light Rail when I drive up to the Hopkins Depot or drive over towards the Minnetonka location, or if I'm in Eden Prairie. So those are things we'll do. So yeah, you've got to stand up for those things that sometimes maybe seem a little counterintuitive, which is spending a lot of money for something. You see the longer range effect. And even as a small business owner, I saw that. Certainly if you're a larger employer and you're right in the Opus area, or you're at the end of the line in Eden Prairie, it makes more sense to you. So it's important. We need to do it right. The public safety piece of it, though, too, comes right in there for me. My business and the building I still own is one block off the light rail station in Minneapolis. And I can tell you some of the horrific things that have gone on, and they're unspeakable and unseeable, some of the assaults and the things that have happened there. So we need to make sure it's safe. And we had a hard time trying to deal with the Met Council Police aspect of it to the Minneapolis Council Police or Minneapolis Police, who's supposed to be patrolling it and keeping it safe, because the Met Council's in charge of running this, even though Hennepin County is paying for it. And that's something that I'm going to be a loud, constant advocate for, is public safety. And that does not make me popular now with certain people. Again, I've lost an endorsement or two over that. And I'm not being belligerent about it. I'm just saying we need to make sure we take care of public safety. What goes on in Minneapolis at times is not right, but we need to take care of it. And we need to make sure people using our public transportation systems feel safe. If you're going to get off at that Hopkins station at 10 o'clock, or you're there at 6 o'clock, or the Eden Prairie station, you need to be safe. There's design things that they could have done differently in Minneapolis. They're slowly making these changes. They finally started to talk about having ambassadors on there, which they started to do. It's very reactive. We need to be proactive. I often look at some things in government. If you ran your business the way that they made some of these decisions, you'd be out of business. In this case, with safety and light rail, you might not have your life, or you'd be assaulted, and you're not going to use it when you hear the stories that go on. Fortunately, they're making some of these changes. Unfortunately, there's a lot less ridership, so it's maybe less of a factor. But we need to look at that, and we need to look at shifting technologies as auto driving cars and things like that. it's going to affect some of that. I think it's still good to have these pipeline transportation things. It's great to see the real estate development that's happening around them. And it's great to see even some of the business incubation that goes on. So it still makes sense, but we need to be adaptive. We need to be realistic. And I'll go back and we need to make sure that they're safe so people want to use them. So that's another big thing that I'll be, as an early supporter who's paid the price for doing that, I'm going to be that much of a louder advocate for doing it right, on budget, on time, and making it safe.
Great. You covered a lot of the details that I think people very interested in, both from a business perspective as well as residents here in Eden Prairie. One of the things, and you have that background to kind of speak to this, people will say, government needs to run more like a business, which means to really be fine-tuned on where dollars are spent, make sure that they're spent the right way, that you eliminate as much waste as possible. You've ran businesses, you've been, an elected official. What's your thoughts on that philosophy of, government needs to be, maybe in its simplest form, more efficient and run a little bit more like a business?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a tough analogy to make at times. And as big of a business advocate and as big as a free enterprise advocate as I am, and all the nerdy things that I read on weekends to sort of make me smarter, I hope in those areas in marketing and technology, and certainly in transportation and public safety, there's a merger of all those things. And that's what I think, I've learned over the years of having been an entrepreneur, and I still have that spirit inside of me, and is to be innovative. Every year I would go speak at the Entrepreneurs Organization, and I used to talk about the Fine Line Music Cafe, my prior business, which made me a good draw for everyone that wanted to hear about what was Lady Gaga like, or what was Prince like, which I really don't know. But I can tell you what the managers were like, or what the staff was like, or what Prince looked like when he'd be in the club. But the business part I could chat about, and it was interesting to do it. When I later sold the Fine Line 6 years ago, and then ran for office, I said, I'm really just trying to be a political entrepreneur. I'm trying to find a new way to do it. That was sort of my brand. It was red and blue making purple. It's also Vikings, if you like the Vikings, and it's also Prince, if you don't like the Vikings. We used to play the Fine Line. But I'm trying to find a way, let's get to solutions. Let's work with the left and the right. So those sorts of things always made sense in the business world to me. They seem to make less sense in the political world. And we need to make it work better. So, that innovation, that optimism, the curiosity, those business traits you need to take into government. And I see less people there. That's probably why I'm running, and it's still why I'm running, even after COVID and the crisis and the riots and all these things and all the negative stuff. So I think the systems work a little differently, but when you look at some really good business leaders that have moved on, they've typically not been the highest profile CEO, you're fired types. That are successful, they're the Mitt Romneys, they're the people like that really get it, that were Republican governors in Democratic states. So I often feel like that sort of person representing a blue area. I was the only Republican elected when Trump got beat in the inner ring suburbs. So somehow that unique way of messaging and having that sort of small business, medium-sized business outlook, was helpful, and people felt good about it. So I think you can look at those models, and you can look at the idea of innovation, but you have to have an expectation that paired to you're providing human services, so there's not an ROI there. The ROI is you make that investment now, you're going to pay a lot less later, and that's the way I look at clean energy. It's the way I look at transportation. It's the way I look at education and public safety. So we need to make those investments. There's fancy words like upstream and all kinds of other stuff. It's spending and it's taxes. You need to be really honest about that. And when you've had to make those hard decisions with your own business, with personal guarantees that you've signed, that's why they're personal, you get that. And then when you're part of a larger budget, like a $12 billion education budget, I look at that like, I'm paying a lot of those taxes. I pay property taxes in Minneapolis and Shorewood and Edina. So I'm a pretty good contributor. I'm happy to contribute. It's a price we pay for civil society, but it's got to make sense. It's got to be accountable. And we need our public elected officials and everything in between, at least to get that part of it. But, systems and operations do translate. It's great to see some of my old friends, even in real estate. One of them has gone over and they work in Hennepin County. They're the facilities manager. There's another person that's on the operations side. So I'm really happy to see, private sector people going into the public sector and helping in those ways, besides the occasional person like me who decides to do the political space, or like Dean Phillips, whose dad was one of my mentors, and Dean's a friend of mine. I'm actually in a book club with him. So we try to do that blue and red thing. I said, Dean, I'm way happier being purple. So you can be blue and talk about no labels. You're still blue. I'll be purple and stay there and use those resources to get it done. But, you know, you have to be careful how you draw the analogies, but, you know, they are there.
Great. Thanks for that. Just wrapping things up, maybe share with us anything that maybe you didn't touch on with our conversation. And I always say, you know, why should people vote for you? So I'll give you the floor to kind of wrap things up.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Well, besides all the endorsements that I had to go out and get that I didn't really want to do and like to do, I always say the best endorsement is a repeat customer. And that's what we did at the Fine Line for, you know, the 20 years I was there in a tech company startup that involved computers and early technology, and later in life in commercial real estate, which I've continued to do. Having 14 current and former mayors, very proud to have Nancy Tyra Lukens from Eden Prairie as one of those people, Jim Ramstead, and all kinds of mayors and former county commissioners that are a part of that. But really, you know, having the breadth of experience and knowledge and having people being willing to step in and be a part of our team, you know, both from Republican circles and Democratic circles. I even had, you know, people that are in the political space, you know, who, you know, didn't think that they should, you know, engage, like Terry Boniff, and they said, you know, we need to. You know, Terry Boniff was a Democratic state senator and always a mentor to me in different ways, just like Jim Ramstead and people like that. But, you know, they know how important Hennepin County is, and they understand that. And most people don't maybe see the things that they do. And having been, you know, at the state capitol, I understand that a lot better now. So it's a huge impact in what happens, and you need people that look at it, you know, have had sort of the sobriety that comes with having lived through 2 or 3 or 4 recessions and feeling that impact and knowing the human suffering as well as what businesses are going through. And I want to bring that empathy that I developed early on in life with having to deal with a parent who's right behind me there, my father, and solely all the people that I've touched and interacted with in Minneapolis, in Edina, in Eden Prairie, in Minnetonka, my district. So someone nicely said, I'm not sure if it's exactly a compliment, you know what, you're a really good fit for your district. So you're not blue enough, you're not red enough, you're purple. And I'm looking to sort of take that passionate message and find a way to put people over partisan politics and get things done, and then get out of the way and move on. This is not a career for me, it's a third act, and I'm looking forward to a fourth one already before I'm elected.
Great, great. Well, I appreciate your time, Dario. As we wrap up these types of things, I always like to say thank you for stepping up. I know it's not easy to run for elected office and put yourself out there, but appreciate your insights today and tying into our business conversation as well as other reasons that people should vote for you. So as I wrap things up, just again, thank you, and we wish you the best of luck in the upcoming election.